Now we're going to take a look at Cinema 4D Lite. Cinema 4D Lite comes packaged with Adobe After Effects. And the way that you get to Cinema 4D Lite is by going to File, to New, and creating a new Maxon Cinema 4D file. And what that will do will prompt a save. So first we have to save the file, and then the actual application will launch. This will take a few minutes for it to launch. And here's the Cinema 4D interface. And Cinema 4D is a professional 3D application and animation tool that's used in feature film production. Cinema 4D Lite is a pared down version. So there's some modeling things that have been scaled back. There has been, there's some tools that are not available that are in the full version. So this version allows us to do pretty much a wide variety of different things. We can do some basic modeling, we can do some animation, we can do some extrusions, and some of the things that we've already seen. So it's a really, really full, well-rounded 3D package. In here, I'm going to talk about the interface. So this main section right here is our viewport. You can already see that we have the ground plane. And on the ground plane, we have some arrows that indicates the Y axis, the Z axis, and the X axis. And this center point is kind of crucial. Over here on the top right, we have the objects manager. All of the objects that we add, all the models that we add are going to be listed here. And this will allow us to manage those objects. Down here, we have the attributes manager. The attributes manager will allow us to manipulate controls for each one of those objects. And down here we have the coordinates manager, and then over here we have the materials and textures manager. Right above that there's a timeline, and the timeline is how we can do the animation inside of Cinema 4D. Along the left hand side we have some controls for manipulating and modeling. We'll get to those in a later video. And up on the top we have some controls for the camera, and we also have some rendering tools. And then we have some tools for creating objects inside of Cinema 4D. So let's start there. So I'm going to click on the primitive dropdown. We see that we have a bunch of different primitives: disk, torus, pyramid, cone, capsule, cube, tube, sphere, cylinder, all these different things that we can start with. So I'm going to just start with a cube object, and you'll see that the object comes in the center of the plane. And you can see that it has the arrows like we've seen in some of the other 3D applications. So if you move your cursor over the arrows, you'll see that it gets highlighted. And with that, you can move along the specified axis that you'd like to move it on. These bracket icons allow you to move in more than one direction. So here, this kind of purple bracket allows me to move in two different axes. And this one allows me to move both on the Y and the Z axes. And then you'll notice that on the arrows there's these small squares, and those will allow you to scale along a specific axis. So if I want to make this look like a book, or if I want to stretch it out to make it look like a sofa, you can do that just by stretching these things out. Now the tools for manipulating objects are up here. So right now I'm on the move tool. So that will allow me to move along the axes like we've seen before. The second tool is the scale tool. Notice that the arrowheads have been replaced with these cubes. So these larger cubes will allow us to scale up and scale down. You can see how that's working. Then we have the rotate tool, and the rotate tool shows the sphere. And on the sphere, the red line will allow us to rotate on the x-axis, the blue line on the z-axis, and rotating on the green line is rotating on the y-axis. And you can get to those tools with keyboard shortcuts. So E is for move, R is for rotate, and T is for scale. Next, we're going to take a look at camera options. So moving around in the 3D space. In the top right corner of every viewport window, we have these camera controls. So this first one allows us to shuttle the space back and forth on the X-plane. X and Y, I should say. This next one allows to dolly in and dolly out. You can zoom in, zoom out. And this one will allow us to orbit, so we can orbit around the entire 3D environment with this tool. And as I'm doing this, you'll notice that half of the object is dipping below the ground plane, and we can fix that just by pulling this up above the ground plane. And now when I orbit around, you'll see that it's above the ground plane. Now the fourth icon here on the top right corner allows us to go into a four-up view. So when I do that, I can see my perspective view, my top view, my right view, and my front view. And if you want to quickly switch to a specific view, you can click on that same icon, and that will switch you to that particular view. So I'm going to go back into my perspective view. Then I want to show you that you don't only have these tools for working with your camera, but you also have some keyboard shortcuts. So if you hold down the 1 key in your left mouse button, that'll allow you to move the camera along the X and Y axis. If you hold down the 2 key, you can dolly in and dolly out. And you hold down the 3 key, that will allow you to orbit around the space. So let's add a couple other models. So I'm going to go add a torus here, and I'll go add a cone. And you see that all the objects appear up here in the object manager, and each one of these objects can be moved almost like layers in Photoshop. If I want to move the position of these objects, I can move the position and drag down or drag up to change the position of these objects. But to manipulate each object, you need to select the object first, and then you have the controls, and then you can move it around. And you can already kind of see some of the potentials for modeling here. Just by interacting with other 3D elements, you can create things like rings and other things like that. So that's the object manager. Down here in the attributes manager, each object has its own attributes, some of the basic attributes, coordinates, object-specific attributes, like in this particular case, the ring radius, the ring segments, and the pipe radius. And these little dials allow you to manipulate those properties, and you can increase or decrease those values just by clicking and dragging over them. Now, one other thing to notice is that for any property, if I go back to the coordinates property, any property that has this little target symbol on it, that target symbol means that this is an animatable property. So I can animate on the position X, Y, and Z, scale X, Y, and Z, and rotation X, Y, and Z, just by clicking on these buttons and then manipulating it in the timeline. So that's some of the basics of 3D and Cinema 4D Lite. And we'll go further and we'll take a look at things like lighting and cameras and some of the other options that are available up here in the next video.